Don't be slipping. Don't be slipping. Before I begin my sermon, I just want to clarify this term, slipping. For those of us who are unfamiliar with this slang, it's more of a modern slang for slipping. It means to relax. It means relaxing. It means being off guard or not on point. So if someone tells you that you are slipping, it simply means that you are not being attentive to your thoughts, your words, or your actions. So, don't be slipping. I want to start with on a humor note. There were three sisters at the age of 92, 94, and 96, all living in a house together. One night, the 96-year-old goes upstairs to take a bath. She puts her foot in and pauses. She yells downstairs to her other sisters, "Was I getting in the bath or was I getting out of the bath?" The 94 then begins to walk upstairs saying, "I'll come help you. I don't know, but I'll come and see." And so as she starts climbing up the stairs, she pauses halfway and then she yells out, "Was I coming up the stairs or down the stairs?" The 92-year-old who was sitting at the kitchen table, who was having tea listening to her sisters, simply shakes her head and says, "I sure hope that I don't become that forgetful." So she knocks on wood for good measure. She then yells, "I'll come up and help both of you as soon as I see who's at the door." Now, which one of these sisters do you think or would you consider slipping? Or all three of these sisters slipping? You see, the psalm that we read today underlines the importance for us to be intentional about our relationship with God in every aspect of our life today. Whether that is through our thoughts, whether that is through our words, or whether that is through our actions, we must learn to be intentional and pay close attention so that we don't go slipping in our relationship with Christ. Please pray with me. God our Father, as we commune together as disciples of your kingdom, may you speak to us that we may receive your word and apply them into our own life. That the words of my mouth be an imitation of your will. Amen. I grew up with the expression that a psalm a day keeps the devil away. So I was, hey, for the sermon, I might as well go at it. It's my first time preaching with the psalm. So understanding that most of the psalms are, if they're not prayers, it's a form of poetry literature. And so I am not much of a poetry type of guy. So, but I did indulge, and I believe that God was telling me to preach for us to not be slipping. The beauty of these psalms is that throughout this multiple literature, they convey a relationship between ourselves and God. Psalm 17 is a prayer of lament from David. It is a cry out from David as he is hoping to be delivered from his prosecutors. As there is a time to weep and a time to rejoice, so there is a time for praise and a time for prayer. David was in great distress and danger as he was being persecuted by, most scholars would believe, Saul. So in this prayer, he addresses himself to God, hoping to find shelter and refuge from it. Right off the bat, we can already relate ourselves to the position of David's shoes. In times of stress, despair, pain, or even a sense of feeling lost, we too often lift up a prayer before God at this time. If you know David, you may recall many narratives that share the good points about his life. But here in this psalm, we are to focus on the low points and his most vulnerable point in life. We may not have the same persecution experience as in David's situation, but we can relate to the feeling of distress from our own lives. Whether that is a time of struggle with health, whether we are struggling with finance, or whether we are struggling with relationships or family, we all can experience this form of distress. There was a former clergy that I had associated with had once stated, As humans, we may all never experience joy and happiness, but we all have experienced pain. That is why we can relate to David in this narrative, that in the time of distress, we may allow these negative thoughts and experiences and our own persecution to make or break our relationship with God. You can't be slipping if you're coming from a place of sincerity. In the first 2 verses, David is pleading to God to hear his prayer. He is pleading to God to hear his cry. He makes the claim that he is speaking to God from his heart, and that his prayer is not intended to be deceitful to God. David was not just throwing around a bunch of words that made him sound pure and sound humorous and sound good. David was speaking from the heart through this prayer. David was willing to be vulnerable with God and to give out a prayer with his life laid out before him. His cry out to God was coming from the heart. And the reason why David isn't letting his guard down is because he's being open before God with his full self. No matter how the prayer is answered, David has nothing to lose, but all to gain. When we go to God in prayer, it is a time for us to be personal and to be sincere. He meant what he spoke, and those feelings had to be aligned with his mind and his mouth. If our hearts lead our prayers, God will meet them with his favor. You can't go slipping if your intentions with God are true and pure. David goes throughout verses 3 and 4 and becomes a little bolder. He wants God to examine his life and test out his faith to prove that David is worthy to be vindicated. Testing in the Hebrew scriptures mean to check and determine the character of the person, whether he was going to be condemned or not. David's request to God to test him shows that all his words, all his thoughts, and all his actions have been vindicated. That he has lived a life intended for the purpose of God. Even through trials, David refuses to allow his mouth to pass over the forbidden speech of going against God. David has kept himself from going with the flow with others around him and his community, and has continued to follow God's every word. You see, every situation he has been placed in, he has continued to live a life seeking the will of God. Even during a time when temptation and distractions could have been easier, he knew that he wasn't going to get caught slipping because his focus was on God. He knew that he wasn't going to be slipping because he lived a life of intentionality on the Word of God. And that is why he was so moved to allow God to test and reveal his own life. You can't be slipping if you're being guided by your own faith. With faith this bold and being so close to God, David knew that he wasn't going to fall into temptations or distraction. In verse 5, we see a pivotal point in our message today. It reads, "My steps have held fast to your paths. My feet have not slipped." When I picture this path in which David illustrates and talks about, I do not picture a narrow, straight, smooth path. I picture a path that has some rocky patches, a path that may be too long for us, a path that may bring us discomfort. But yet David had remained steadfast in the path of the Lord. The important part about the path is that it is the walking direction of the Lord to the best of our abilities. Yes, he may not have been perfect, and the path may not have been easy, but it is a path that is being directed to God. It is a path we all must continue to take as we live out this life that we live. Understanding that it only gets easy when you are guided down this path by your faith in God. Up to this point of prayer, David has not showed any point of him slipping. He has pleaded to God to hear his cries and begs for mercy. He has shared with us his sincerity and that his intentions with God are pure and true. With his words, thoughts, and actions, he has lived in accordance with the will of God. So David has confidence that God will hear his prayers and uplift him from this point of despair and from his fear of the persecutors. Many of us here today have this tendency to be slipping. We allow our current circumstances in life to determine our attitude, our thoughts, our actions, and our words. We continue to let current battles that we are facing today affect our faith in God, but mostly affect the way we pray to God. But David wants us to be reminded of the loving and caring nature of God. He asks for God to demonstrate his loving kindness. We too understand that we have a God who is loving and merciful, the one that is instrumental and pivotal in our own lives. It is the abundant love that God brings to us that has brought the Israelites out of Egypt. It is the love that has healed the sick. It is the love that died on the cross for our sins. It is the love that has brought us through many challenges, and is the love that has allowed us to overcome all these obstacles that we have faced in our own life. David is wanting to receive that love. In our final verses, we are given two imageries of the love we each crave. To guard us as the apple of the eye is to ultimately give him protection. Just like the Israelites, we prize the pupil of our own eyes as something to be closely guarded. But the image of us hiding under the wings from our enemies is the comfort we are wanting. It is the image of hiding under the wings of God for safety, for comfort, and for nurture. The image of a mother hen sheltering her chicks under her wings is the type of imagery we are having when we enter from God. To be in that safe haven knowing that God will protect us with whatever situation we are dealing with. David lifted up this prayer, understanding and having confidence that God would not let him slip. His prayer was intentional into speaking to our own lives today. Being intentional in our own everyday life gives us this boldness, especially when we are walking closer to God down his own paths. We see that we are intentional about our relationship with God when we gain confidence, assurance, peace, sense of purpose, and hope. David is teaching for us today is that we do not go slipping when we're walking down the path with God. Yes, times can be hard, and we can feel that we may be persecuted from all different aspects of our own life. But we be reassured that God's love, care, and comfort is there for us, surrounding us with these arms of compassion and love. The adversaries that we may face in life should not hinder us on our reception of God and hinder our conversations with God, our relationships with God. We should be in a place of comfort knowing that we are all under God's love and care, and that we continue to live a life walking down the path with Christ, knowing that we too would not be slipping if we were with God. Amen.